Hey, what's up, guys? Just tuning in here for some weekly updates. Last 2 weeks, I have been out with different parts of the team, traveling around. We did a kind of crazy tour. And so I do want to talk a little bit about that in a second here. We have some pretty cool launches coming up this week or going on this week. Up BNB is very cool to talk about. And I have some interesting thoughts on the future of Up and kind of where that could potentially go. And you'll see how that relates as well. And finally, the last thing that we have for today is our newsletter. We're actually kicking that off here, and I'm super excited to see that and start putting out there some very cool information on what's happening on a more consistent basis, documented for people that can't tune into this to just kind of check in. And so, yeah, looking forward. So just on that note, to kind of kick things off, Up BNB is going to up version 2 on the Binance Smart Chain is going to be kicking off. And it's super exciting because it's our most liquid chain. So that's going to be a great more full version launch of Up version 2, which is neat because the first tests that we did, I would consider that being Harmony, were extremely successful. We saw people coming in and minting Up. We saw a ton of liquidity has been added to the pool. And we saw that 95% of the liquidity currently of, or I should say 95% of the collateral of the Up token is in a liquidity pool right now, which is a super cool test of this concept that, the Up token itself really can't suffer impermanent loss if it's providing that liquidity into a pool. So for me, like doing that on a public and open pool is super cool because it kind of shows like, hey, like this is like here to be like tested, see what happens. We had our first rebalance event this morning, which was a huge success. It injected an additional 50% into the liquidity pool that was what was minted and things like that, shore things up. And as a result, the redeem value went up, which is perfect. That's exactly what it should have done. So super exciting to see that. And it was like a great way to kick off the day as we go into BNB, where these values, become, what is it? Maybe 100 times more, not 10, no, 50, no, 20 to 50, 20, 30, 40 times more. So it's quite a bit more capital that's going to be going into these pools, which is super exciting. And I think a massive opportunity for people to really play with this neat system that is generating an APR from a totally new source, like a totally untapped source. I had conversations with people from Solana and Compound in the last week, and just talking about this as a potential new source to basically generate some kind of APR is very cool because, as far as I'm aware, no one else is doing it, which is neat. So on that note, I do want to talk a little bit more about the future of Up. Things, Up token is cool. Up token is a very cool thing that we have, and it's been around in some sense for years, 4.5+ years. As long as I've been working in crypto, to some extent, Up has been around. So dates back to seed, and we continually see these kind of upgrades along the way. It's just starting as a pure 100% collateralized token. And I think for me, kind of the next steps for the future of Up, I don't think it's going to be the same kind of disruptive teardown redeployment that we've seen. So, Seed saw that. It saw some like interesting changes, some totally new versions coming out. We did see the first major update to the Up token itself here, going from version 1 into version 2. I don't think that the next changes that we're seeing are going to require a version 3 as an example, but there are some very cool additions that we can make that basically lower the barrier to entry for Up, from my perspective, significantly. So one thing that I want to talk about is the possibility of new minting roles. So this is something that version 2 does add. It basically allows people to come in, come up with new concepts, new strategies, new methodologies on which to interact with Up, and can mint it accordingly to kind of take advantage of maybe liquidity or something like that, or some arbitrage opportunities, etc. So that's super interesting. It's also a way for blockchains themselves to kind of come in and say, hey, we want to support this ecosystem. We want to come in and see a whole bunch of up minted at once. How do we do that in a more sustainable way with our token to make sure that things go in correctly to support the ecosystem? So that's super cool. And I'm sure we'll see blockchains taking advantage of that, hopefully in the near future. Potentially new blockchains, which is cool. And for me, something else that's kind of neat, that's maybe on the horizon that I don't think is it's not a massive change, but the potential of changing up from a token whose backed value is constantly going up to a token whose value is fixed and that rebases instead. Because essentially, when you look at up, it's kind of like rebasing, but the rebase number is the backed value. So there's no reason you can't just flip that math and say, instead of the backed value going up over time, it's just backed one-to-one with the native token, like a wrap token, and it rebases into more of itself over time in your wallet. There's nothing stopping it from being that today. And that's just like a cool concept. It doesn't change the rate or reward rate or anything like that. What it does change is the way people interact with it. And I think that's super exciting to investigate, because for me, it means that if you're looking at a pair, right, like an up native token pair, like an up one pair, if it's a rebase token that's based at one, one up is worth one native token. So if the price is ever not that, you should rebalance it. You should buy or sell, because that's free money on the table, which is super cool. And I think from a new person coming into DeFi and these kind of more complex tokens that do very neat things, I think it's a good opportunity for them to understand the concept of a backed value going up over time in a way that they're more familiar with. You've seen some kind of hints about this, like the concept of kind of like a savings account in crypto. What would that look like? And right now for us, the savings account is the value of the assets that you have go up over time. That is up, rather than the amount of assets that you have go up over time. So I think it's a very cool investigation. It's a very cool thing to look into. Is that going to come out in the next 3, 6, 9 months? I'm not really sure. But I do think it's somewhere in the vision of the future here. And I think that's going to be an update that maybe is like I said, it wouldn't be a new token. It wouldn't change the token today. It would just be a different way of viewing it. So I think it's really important to adoption within the space. And so that kind of takes us into kind of the big thing that I want to talk about today, which is our road trip. So we've spent the last 2 weeks on the road. We did basically, actually, I'll just go ahead and open this. We did Palo Alto, San Francisco, New York, and finally Aspen. Talked to a lot of very cool people, a lot of people that, I kind of don't want to get into who specifically, because it's probably not the right thing to do. But I do want to say we talked to what I would consider some of the most influential people in our industry, and talked to them about this. This is actually exactly what we showed them. And we've been talking about, is this something that should be made public? Is this something we feel comfortable sharing? And to be honest, I kind of like the idea of being more transparent, because that's really who we are at the beginning of this. And so this is I just want to give a quick overview to everyone of what this is here. And hopefully in the near future, it's something we can make public for people to come in and play around with and kind of get a better understanding of what it means for us to build an L1. This concept of an L1 that we have, which is potentially new in this. It's potentially doing something new and different in this ever-changing industry, which is cool. So as you can tell, I don't like to use PowerPoint, so this was built in Google Sheets. So I'm just going to go through it. So just simply, what if blockchain adoption wasn't crypto adoption? What does that mean? What does it look like? And what are some of the opportunities that we see there? So obviously, crypto or blockchains today, they tend to be crypto first. They're coming up with these tokens. maybe building these complex tokenomics, generating APRs or whatever, staking. And that's how these companies are largely extracting value. They're largely extracting income off of their tokens, whether they're selling them to their users, which you could consider as investors of a platform, or to VCs or something like that. But at the end of the day, they're kind of stuck in this situation where, to encourage people to hold their token, the most valuable utility that they can offer is an APR, which is typically done in the form of staking. And we're going to see how that's problematic here in a second. I'm not aware of any network first opportunities, or I should say L1s out there. I think there's been some concepts, but nothing that exists. So not even Bitcoin falls into a network first, because obviously you mine Bitcoin, you paid Bitcoin to operate it. But the kind of concept here is, what if we built a network that was kind of tokenless? It didn't extract its value off of the token. Instead, it extracted value for the underlying organization from the adoption of the network itself. So instead of there being this, kind of broken law of supply and demand, you've actually got, network demand is directly equating to revenue for the organization and the economy. So I'm not going to go through everything in detail, but essentially the problem here is gas tokens. The key to a successful business is unpredictable costs at no one ever, because that's kind of the situation that we're in. Is blockchains, their gas tokens behave like commodities, which puts them in a situation where a business must incorporate this volatile commodity to utilize a blockchain. That means they have to be kind of like investors, right? They need to kind of suffer from this unpredictable cost, which makes it really difficult for them to operate. And we're seeing this issue now. We're seeing Lido, who is operating staked ETH on Ethereum, causing some major issues from my perspective. The APR on ETH right now is about 4%. On Lido, you're getting about 3.9%, if I recall correctly, and it's competing with DeFi. It's better than that's almost as good as Compound. It's better than tons of pools on Uniswap and Curve, which these are giants. In Ethereum, these are giants. These are like the majority of DeFi at one point. Now we're seeing that DeFi is kind of being eaten by staking via these staked ETH. And what that does is it means that Lido is becoming kind of a centralizing actor in Ethereum as well, where now I think something like a third of ETH staked is from Lido, which means that when proof of stake opens, a huge number of the staked ETH is going to be under Lido. And that's problematic from my perspective, because it makes it very challenging for Uniswap and these businesses to operate, because they're in direct competition with the fundamental operation of the blockchain itself. So not only are expenses super high, but now they can't give out the best rate because they're competing with the network itself. And then frankly, the network should never compete with its businesses that operate. It's not fair to a business, and it doesn't incentivize growth. It just incentivizes people to hold ETH, which I don't think helps the overall economy. So from our perspective, this is kind of where the future is that the adoption of token-based economics is preventing blockchain technology itself from just becoming what the internet is today. And I'm going to skim through this because we're going on a little bit, but just to kind of hit through it, we did look at 16 different blockchains, everything from ETH, Bitcoin, Solana, everywhere, 16 different blockchains to kind of look at what's happening. They're all just those 16. They generate about $1.4 billion in fees annually. These are just transaction fees. To operate those networks, they're subsidizing about $12.3 billion. What that means is that they're spending that out to stakers, validators, and things like that just to operate their network. If they took that away, that would be a reduction in the APRs, and it may cause people to not hold things like Ethereum if there was no APR, for example. So it's a real problem, and from my perspective, that's a real expense. They're spending $12 billion to generate that $1.4 billion in revenue, which most of them just burn. So let's talk a little bit more about that. Blockchains are pretty cheap to run, to be perfectly honest. The average blockchain costs about $300K per year to operate. That's hardware network costs. So if you were to run these networks completely free in a centralized way, you'd be at $300K a year to run a world-class blockchain, which makes sense, because you think about it. You're not sending 4K videos on a blockchain. You're sending basically text messages. Hashes of small amounts of data are going back and forth in a decentralized way. So it makes sense that the costs are low. So they're spending about $8.50 to generate $1. If you took away some of those costs, you could really flip this thing around. You can make it such that you could spend half a cent per dollar you generate if you were to take away some of those subsidies in your possible generation costs. So we're going to talk about that as well. Just looking at what some of these blockchains spend, things like Ethereum obviously is ridiculous, $9 billion a year to subsidize validators today. It's going to improve a lot with ETH 2.0. It's going to be just a mere 1.5 billion. I believe Netflix is 300 million a year to operate. So it's only, what is that? 5 times the amount. So it's something. That's something to think about. And there's a nice big range here where you can take a look through and kind of play with. So I'll leave that for when this goes public. Going into this a little bit more, we've got some stuff here on the solution, just the kind of stuff that we're talking about. This is all stuff that you've heard, and kind of the sector that we're thinking about. We're thinking about crypto as like a territory, right? And it's this massive landscape. We have, Bitcoin is extremely generally predictable cost, just like Solana. Actually, Solana is basically fixed. You have things like, ETH is maybe a little more volatile, very expensive. Solana is cheap and predictable, which is great. So there's kind of like a new space that we're pushing into. And the concept is kind of this. If you think about what a blockchain, if you take away tokenomics, what is a blockchain selling? And it's selling block space, selling a shipping container. And what's happening is it's shipping those containers on the open ocean, and it's saying, hey, I'm selling this much space to the person that bids the most. It's super high security, it's decentralized, and and it's small. We can't really fit a ton of information there, and it's going to be and we can do so privately. As the most similar industry that I can think of is actually cloud. Is actually a cloud where they're basically selling huge amounts of information. It's not private. It's not necessarily as decentralized, and it's not. Of course, it's not going to be as secure as a cryptographically secure blockchain. So that's really where we're thinking that this fits, is more in the direction of this kind of like stable chain territory, we're starting to call it, where things can become extremely cheap and very much like known costs to operate. Like we know what it costs to send a transaction and operate that blockchain. So for us, we consider this, kind of a new space in terms of crypto. And from here, things can just get cheaper and more known. So that's the future that we see. There's some crazy stuff here, looking at dollar amounts and whatnot and how these companies operate. I'll kind of leave that all here for fun for you guys. A little bit just about our history. Everyone watching this knows all of that, who we are, and just kind of wrapping that up. This is all tied to unbelievable amounts of data with kind of detailed notes on everything we've taken. So this is a pretty all-encompassing sheet, tons of references, tons of information to look into. And with any hope, we'll be able to make this public here in the near future. So there's some cool questions there. I think I'm going to actually address those here in a second. The last thing that I want to leave us off with is newsletter. That is coming out soon. I'm super excited to see us talk about some of these details. There's some really neat things that we're gonna take positions on. So this is a good opportunity for us to start doing that. And that kind of wraps us up. I do see questions in the chat. So I do want to hit those. I think Steve is getting back on those as well. If open for questions, what is the difference between XDAI and stablechain? Such a good question. Actually, Celo does something very similar too. So Celo actually allows you to pay for transactions in a stable coin. XDAI was a way that that XDAI chain did allow that to operate. But I think what happened is, there was a ICO crypto boom and there was a lot of money to be made. And so you saw Gnosis and DAI kind of merge, and now we've kind of maybe drifted away from the core ideals there. I don't think we ever saw that true implementation of XDAI, which is unfortunate because that was a very cool concept. But things got very complicated when they started to add in tokenomics, which is the state that we're at today with, as Steve mentioned, GNO or no tokens. The most similar example that I can think of, I think today, is Celo, which is an awesome company. And after last week, it's like my favorite blockchain. But I mean, they're super cool. And from my perspective, that's probably the most similar. The difference between what they're doing is the way that they kind of they still charge the transaction fee in their native token, but they do allow it to be paid in a stable coin. So it's kind of like a hybrid between I'd say what XDAI was and a regular blockchain. So it's kind of a middle ground, which is very cool. We're going all in, full in the like deep end of the pool here. We're taking out the tokenomics completely and making it a simple and open concept for a stablecoin to pay for this using existing stablecoin infrastructure. So yeah, that's kind of it there, guys. So much more to talk about on the subject, but I'll leave that for another day. I spent the last 2 weeks meeting with people about it. So on that note, guys, I'm going to wrap us up here. Any questions, do feel free to put them here in the chat. I can read them. So I will address them then. And thank you all so much. Have a great week, and we'll talk soon. Bye.